am not I. I am this one walking beside me who I do not see, who at times I manage to visit, and at other times I forget. The one who takes a walk when I am indoors, the one who speaks when I am silent, the one who forgives, sweet, when I hate, the one who will remain standing when I die. That's a poem by Juan Ramon Jimenez, translated from the Spanish by Robert Bly. Today we're going to look at questions of identity and who we are. And we're going to do that through the story of Odysseus as he returns to his island of Ithaca. And when he returns, he takes up many selves there and looks at himself from all different points of view. Who are we when we are far from home? Who are we when we are traveling? Who are we when the environment around us changes, our jobs, our families, our culture? This is the Crane Bag Podcast, and my name is Jay Leeming. Thank you for joining me. Let us begin. We begin with a man asleep on a beach in the fog. There is the sound of the crashing surf, the waves breaking and sliding up the sand and then falling back into the ocean again. There are the seagulls crying in the air as they fly through the fog. And there is the man asleep on a blanket which is red and gold. And around him there are objects, treasures, beautiful things. A bronze cat with turquoise eyes, 3 bronze spears, a silver bowl embossed with the shapes of dragonflies, a wooden trunk tied with a very complicated and magical knot. And if we could open that trunk inside, we would find gold pieces and small little statues of birds and of cats. These things are all around this man as he sleeps. And perhaps we could leave him there. Perhaps this would be the end of our story. This moment like a raindrop which speaks of the whole sea. But perhaps this moment is also a seed, and by giving it our attention, by watering it with our attention, it will flourish and grow. For this man has a story, and this man has a name. And his name is Odysseus. And he awoke, hearing the sounds of the sea, and the seagulls crying in the air. But he was a cautious man, and he did not open his eyes. He lay there for a moment, remembering. And then he opened his eyes, and he looked up, and he saw the branches of an olive tree above him. And he sat up, and he looked around. This is not Ithaca, he thought to himself. Those Phaeacians, they broke their promise. They brought me to some other place. This is not my home. I don't recognize any of this. He stood up and began to pace around. In the fog, he looked at the beach, at the trees. He recognized nothing. What island is this? Are the people here generous and kind, or will they be mean and vicious? Will they devour me as the Cyclops devoured many of my crew? He looked around in despair, and then he saw a teenage boy walking through the fog, barefoot, with a fishing net over his shoulder. "Hey, you there, stranger, tell me," he said, "what island is this?" And the boy walked towards him and said, "Stranger, you mean to say that you do not know where you are? Well, it is said that if you don't know where you are, perhaps you also do not know who you are. But I will free you from both of these problems. You are on an island that is usually sunny, a rocky place. Not much good for farming, though grapes and olives do grow here. A good place for goats and for sheep. People give it a name, and that name is Ithaca." "Ithaca," Odysseus said. "Yes, I have heard of that place. You see, I come from the broad land of Crete. In that sunny island there, close to the sea, I grew up on that island, but I had no love of the sea. I loved the things of the earth, the clay and the dirt. I'm a potter from Crete, in fact. Although my work with my hands, the beautiful things I could make, well, all that was cut short by the Trojan War. For I was dragged away to fight in that war, to defend the honor of Agamemnon. But I was lucky. I was lucky, though I made no beautiful things, though all I had to do was hack and slice and fight to protect myself and others, still I survived that war. And I got in a boat with all the others, and we started to set sail for home, for the broad land of Crete. But you know how the gods are, they send us troubles. And so Zeus sent a storm cloud down, a great thunderstorm which shook the sea and ruined our boat. Yes, we were lost upon the sea, wrecked upon the sea. And I clung to a timber, and I washed ashore on the island of the Phaeacians. And they cared for me and promised to bring me home back to my dear island of Crete. But clearly they have broken their promise. Clearly they've brought me here. They have not kept their word. I don't want to be here. This is not where I want to be. I must get home. Stranger, said the boy, you're not from Crete. Ah, yes, I am, said Odysseus. I remember the green wooden door of my house. You should see the basil plants outside there, and the black cat that would always sleep in the sun beside that plant. No, no, stranger, said the boy. You're not from Crete. You are Odysseus, and this is your home. And as the boy spoke, a wave went through the air, a ripple in the air, and suddenly the boy had sea-gray eyes and was taller and more elegant and more powerful. Suddenly the boy was Athena, goddess of wisdom and power. And around her a ripple went through the air, and all the birds hushed for a moment. And then they began to sing again. Athena, Odysseus said, Athena, great one, I honor your strength and your power. I'm grateful to be here in your presence, but clearly there must be some mistake. This isn't Ithaca. This is some other island. Is this a test devised by the gods for me? What trick is this? Oh, Odysseus, she said, you don't need to tell stories anymore. You don't need to be so suspicious or fearful. You are home. Look here. And she waved her right arm, and the fog drifted away from that side of the beach. And there they could both see a rock, a beige rock, all twisted over. It looked like a big bird there, hunched over. And Odysseus said, Look, that's Raven's Rock. I know that place. I learned to swim right near there. Laertes, my father, taught me to swim right by that rock. I used to make hats out of the seaweed. Yes, she said, yes. And look here. And she waved her left arm, and the fog drifted away from the beach. And in that direction they saw some boulders, a tumble of boulders in a small hill. That's the cave of the Nymphs, Odysseus said. I used to play there as a boy also. It has 2 entrances, one from the seashore and one to the sky. And one is for the dead and one is for the living. I would go in. There's amazing rocks in there, purple and green, even some orange stalactites. And honeybees come in and out with making their murmuring music out of the hole in the ceiling. For everyone knows that the bees are the spirits of the dead. Yes, said Athena, yes, this is your Ithaca, and you are home. And the truth of this sank into Odysseus's bones, and the tears slid down his cheeks and fell into the sand. You are home, said Athena, but your troubles are far from over. In fact, they've barely begun. For your palace is filled with thieves, men who devour your wealth and court your wife. So let the 2 of us sit down beneath this olive tree. Let us talk together and find a way, find a strategy for you to get back to your palace and to reclaim your place there as king of that palace and of this island. Yes, said Odysseus, let us do that. So the 2 of them sat down, the goddess and the man, and they spoke to each other. And the fog returned, wrapped itself around the branches and the trunk of that olive tree so that no one could see them. And they spoke their secrets in the mist as the waves crashed and the birds cried in the air. And when they had finished talking, when they had made their plans, Odysseus got up and began to pick up the treasures there in the sand, treasures left for him by the Phaeacians. He took the trunk, the wooden trunk filled with gold pieces. He took the bronze spears, the bronze statue of a cat with turquoise eyes, and many other things as well, rings and jewels, tapestries and blankets, all kinds of things, and he put them in a small cave there, in some rocks nearby. And he sealed the door with a stone and put driftwood in front of it, and grasses and leaves, so that no one would find it. Good, said Athena, good. You know how to keep secrets, don't you? But you must keep yourself secret as well. You must be a beggar, I think, my friend. And she reached out, and she touched him between the eyes with her fingers. And as she did so, wrinkles spread over his face, and his hair became the color of ashes, and he felt a pain in his back, and he stooped over. And without thinking about it, he reached down and picked up a piece of driftwood to use as a walking stick. And his cloak, given to him by the Phaeacians, a beautiful red and gold and green cloak that he had, it was changed as well, and it became rags, a mess of rags shredded by the sea and the wind and by years of travel, so it seemed. And then Athena said, Now you must go, walk up the hill here, and visit your dear swineherd, Eumaeus, for he is still loyal to you. As for me, I must go. There is a young man approaching this island, and I must make sure that he arrives home safely. Who is that? Odysseus said. But there was no one there to answer, for Athena was gone. All Odysseus could see was an osprey flying, spreading its wings as it flew away across the waves. He watched the osprey go. And then he took his walking stick in hand, and he turned and he walked up the sand into the trees, past the olive trees and up the hills into Ithaca itself. And as he went, his feet remembered stories from the ground. Every step that he took reminded him of a place and a story and a thing that had happened there, an event, for he knew that island deeply in his bones, in his feet, and in his heart, for he had been raised there. And the songs came back to him like a beautiful music. And he listened to the hum of the insects and to the singing and the crying of the birds, forest birds now, as he went higher up the hills. And as he walked, the sun itself rose into the sky higher. The great crackling chariot of Helios, the sun god, rose higher into the sky. And after a while, Odysseus heard a different sound. And this was a squealing, snorting sound. In fact, it was a sound of many squeals and snorts, hundreds of them. And he came to the edge of the forest, and he looked, and there was a large field covered in pigs and mud and slop and pigsties. And at the center of this field there was a house made out of hundreds of white stones. And beside this house there was a large oak tree glimmering with the blaze of the sun. And there was a man out there in the pigsties spreading out acorns for the pigs to eat. And in front of the house was another man cutting a piece of oxhide, making himself a boot out of that oxhide. Odysseus took a long look at this scene. And then he took a deep breath, and he stepped out of the trees and walked in the open sun across the mud towards the small hut there. And as he did so, suddenly there came a tremendous barking. Rawr, rawr! And 4 dogs, black dogs, came around the edges of the house, running for him, growling and barking as they came. Rawr, rawr! And the man outside the house, he jumped up and he threw down the oxhide he was cutting, and he ran after the dogs. And Odysseus knew just what to do. He dropped his walking stick, he got down on one knee, he laid his hand out, palm up, so that the dogs could smell him and find out who he was. But they came on, growling and roaring, growl, and the man shouted, Zakynthos, Same, heel, boy, heel, back, back, heel. And the dogs heeled, they pulled back from Odysseus, and they growled at him, with the slobber falling from their jaws. And the man said, Stranger, stranger, you could have been torn apart, watch yourself. These are my vicious guard dogs. I need them to protect these pigs. Stranger, watch yourself. But I see you are a wanderer. You look like you've come from a long way off, and all wanderers are sacred to Zeus. So well then, I will shelter you and welcome you to this place. You look like you could use a good welcome. Come with me. Would you like a glass of water? Yes, please, said Odysseus. All right then. So they walked to the hut across the mud. And the man went into the hut and came out with a wooden cup filled with water. Here you go, stranger, here you go. All wanderers come from Zeus, it is said. And perhaps my dear master is a wanderer right now. My dear master, gone so long. You see, if he was here, I would have a grander house for you to welcome you into. I would have more things. I would perhaps even have a wife and a family. But that is perhaps not to be. So I long for my dear master, and I think of him wandering over this earth, and if he is not dead in the sea, if crabs have not eaten the flesh from his bones, then perhaps he is wandering in some distant land just as you are, and perhaps there is a swineherd somewhere who is welcoming him even now. And so I welcome you. My name is Eumaeus, and I care for the pigs here. Come in, have some food. Come on in, stranger. So the two of them went into the hut, and they sat down. There was a wooden table and 2 benches there. And Eumaeus got some food for Odysseus, some bread and some cheese, and a little wine in a bowl with some water. And Odysseus ate, and Eumaeus ate as well. And they shared thoughts about the day and the weather, things like that. And then Odysseus said, "This master you speak of, who is that? For I have wandered far over this earth, and it's very possible I've even met the man." "Ah," said Eumaeus, "my master. Well, he was a good man, a good king, a good warrior, and a good friend. But he is not here, and so there is this great absence over this place, a great cloud. His house is filled with thieves. But he was a good man, and I should not even talk of him any more, really. He's probably dead in the sea, as I said. Well, his name was Odysseus." "Odysseus," Odysseus said. "I have heard of him. Yes, I know of him. In fact, I served with him in the Trojan War. And not only that, I can tell you he's coming home." No, said Eumaeus. "Don't start telling stories. I tell you, every beggar that comes wandering into this place, well, word reaches Penelope that a beggar has come, and she calls this person to her halls there, and sits the beggar down in a beautiful chair, and gives him wine, and of course the beggar has stories about Odysseus. For everyone knows she misses him so in her heart, she longs so for his return, and she is so hungry for these stories, that the beggars say these stories, and she knows they're all lies. She knows they're fantasies, but still she listens, so great is the longing in her heart. And she is glad even to imagine him there out in the world, and him perhaps returning. And the tears slide down her cheeks. And then she gives the beggar a cloak or something like that, and the beggar goes on his way. So don't you start. Don't go telling me about Odysseus, because I'm frankly just sick of it." No, Odysseus said. "I tell you, he is coming back. I swear to you, he will return. In fact, he might even be here now. He might even be on this island, perhaps in disguise somewhere. He could be here today. And if not, I say he's returning in, I'd say, a week or so. And if that happens, well then dress me in beautiful garments, beautiful clothes, make me like a king. I will feel like a king when he returns. And if he does not return, well, throw me from the nearest cliff, as an example to the beggars not to tell stories." "Well, I wouldn't throw you from a cliff," said Eumaeus. "I'm not that sort of person, you see. But as for your oath, well, we'll just let it lie. We will let it sit there, and I don't think it's true, but I'm gonna let it lie there. But stranger, tell me, where are you from? 'Cause I don't think you walked across the sea here on your own 2 feet. "No, it's true," said Odysseus. "I did not walk. I came here, well, I come from a long way off, you know. I come from the broad land of Crete. Yes, Castor was my father, son of Hylax. I loved that island. I grew up there. My father was a priest of Poseidon, and he would pray to the god, the blue-haired god who shakes the earth. My father was an expert in words, you might say, and the giving of words to what is sacred in this world, and he was expert at tangling those words together in a glimmering way. He would sing those songs, making offering to Poseidon, so he was known for that, and everybody loved him for what he did. But as for me, well, I don't love the sea. I never have. I loved rooted things, trees, things like that with roots in the ground, and so in my time I became a carpenter. And I would make beautiful things. I would carve wooden bowls, little statues, all kinds of things. A table like this one right here. I could make you a table, sir. Yes, I could. My hands still know how to do that sort of thing. So I would craft beautiful things, and I was known throughout Crete for my skills. But then the Trojan War came. Yes, that groaning beast of a war that chewed us all up and spat us out again. I was dragged across the sea to defend Agamemnon's honor in that war, in the place of Troy there. And I did my duty. And I must tell you, my skills came in handy. Yes, For there were times in that war when things were not going well for us. The Trojans had us pent up right near our ships. We thought we would have to get in our boats and sail shamefully home. So we built shields to protect our ships and ourselves, built them out of wood. So I constructed those, with the help of many others, to protect our boats from the flaming arrows and the spears of the vicious Trojan army. And then that war ended, and it ended with a horse. Perhaps you've heard of that, yes. That was Odysseus's idea, and the man himself. And he thought of that, and I helped to build that horse. So I pounded the nails in the side of that thing, that great beast, which was hollow on the inside, so the soldiers could be there and ambush the Trojans at night. And well, what do you know? It worked. So I did my part in that war, I'm telling you. But I was very glad when it was over. I was glad to be all in one piece. So many had lost arms, legs, or worse. So many were deeply scarred inside. And perhaps I have some scars as well. But we got in a boat, and we set sail. But you know how the gods are. The gods are not always kind. They deal in love and hate, in anger and forgiveness equally. It's all one to them. Zeus the cloud-gatherer, the son of Cronus, he sent a great thunderstorm, which shattered our boat upon the sea. All of us were lost, cast to the far edges of the world. But as for me, I held tight to a plank. I was lucky. The gods sent me a plank to hang on to. And I tell you, I have never loved a piece of wood so much. I had dealt with wood all my life, but now to hang on to that board on the sea as I drifted for days, it was horrible. But that plank of wood kept me alive. And soon I washed up on a distant island. And this island was not doing well. The people there were starving. Yes, the gifts of the sea had not come to them. Their fishermen would go down in the morning, and their nets would be empty after their fishing was done. So the people were starving, and when they found out that my father was a priest of Poseidon, well, they enlisted me right away. The king there, the withered king of this land, had me go to the sea and make an offering to Poseidon. I told him over and over again, I'm a carpenter. I love wood and rooted things. I don't love the sea. I can't do this. But they commanded me. At the point of a spear, they said, you must make offering to Poseidon, for he is angry with us. You were just the one who has come, just the one we need to do this. And so I prayed. I prayed devoutly, I can tell you. I prayed with the best words I could, and I tried to remember some of the songs my father sang, and I still had them in me. And I sang these songs, and I raised my hands up to the God, and my feeling was deep, I'll tell you. Because if that failed, well, they might kill me and offer me to the sea for all I knew. But the next day, well, my prayers, our prayers were answered, and Poseidon was kind to us. And the fishermen went to the sea, and they returned with their nets filled with wet and silver-backed fish. Glimmering fish filled those nets, and the people rejoiced, and they ate, and the families of that land were fed. Well, everyone was very happy, the king most of all. But did they let me leave? Absolutely not. They had me stay. I protested. I said, Crete is the land I love. That is where I come from. I must get back there. After all these wars, I have to return. But he said, no, you must stay here. You must pray to Poseidon, for that is good for my people. We must be in sync with this God, in harmony with him. He must know our desires. We must offer these offerings to him. So you must stay here and sing the glad, glimmering songs which weave our lives together with the lives of the gods. You must stay, and you can never leave. That's what he said. And so the years went by, and I longed in my heart to return to Crete, but every day I made offering to Poseidon, and I prayed and I sang, and the sea was generous. Poseidon, who is the sea, was generous. And the fish came into the nets, and the people were fed. And the children were fed, and they grew up happily and in a healthy way. And it was during this time that I met your dear Odysseus again. Yes, because he'd been blown off course by a storm, and he came to that island, with all his sailors there. And we saw each other, and we embraced. He remembered me from the Trojan War, and we exchanged stories about all that had happened to us since the war had ended. And he told me then that he was on his way to speak to the magical oak tree at Dodona. For that oak tree, as you know, it whispers with the secrets of the gods. And he wanted to go there and ask a question. Should he return to Ithaca in secret, in disguise, or openly, in the broad light of day? Which was the better course? So he wished to go and speak with this oak, and after he had done that, he would return to Ithaca. That's what he told me. So he spent some time there with his crew, and we traded stories, and then he went off to go towards Dodona. And I did not see him again. For some time later the king died, and his son took the throne. And his son was more kindly than his father. And he decided that I could go home. So there was a boat passing through of Thracian merchants, and he said, "You can go with them. You have done us a good service here. You have given many gifts to me and to my people. We thank you. And as a reward for this, we are sending you home." I thanked the king, I knelt down before him, and then I got on that boat. And we raised the mast, and we set sail on the waters, but it was not to be. For some time later we were attacked by pirates. Pirates came, and the merchants were no match for them. They seized everything they had, killed many of them, and they tied me up to sell me as a slave. They weren't sure where exactly, but they went over the sea, and finally, just a few days ago, they came to this island, to Ithaca. And they wanted to sell me in the morning in the market, but I would have none of that. I'm a crafty man, you know, and I found a way to slip free. I slipped free of those bonds and went down into the water and crawled ashore in the darkness. They found out I was missing. I heard them cursing in the shallows among the reeds, looking for me everywhere they could. But I escaped them, and I slept in the forest. And then today I walked through the forest here. I heard the pigs, I came across the muddy ground, I saw your hut, and I came to you, dear Eumaeus, and I came to your hut, and that is why I sit here at this table. That is why I tell you my story now. "Oh, stranger," said Eumaeus, "that's a story filled with grief. My heart is weighed down by the sorrow in your story. You are truly a man far from home. But let us make offering to the gods who send us troubles and blessings as well." And the two of them poured wine in their bowls, and they stepped outside the hut, and they spoke bright words to Zeus, the son of Cronus, the thundercloud god, the god of lightning, and they said these words, and they poured the wine into the earth. And the wine went down into the ground, and their words went up through the air, past the realm of the clouds, and the stars, and the moon, past the realm of the birds, high up to the realm of Olympus, where the gods live, and sing, and carouse, and argue, and dance, and dream the world which we live in. And Zeus was there, and Poseidon was there as well, pacing around the blue-haired god, and he turned to Zeus, and he said, "Zeus, have you seen what has happened? Have you noticed? Odysseus has come home. Yes, that hated man has come home, the man who, I remind you, blinded my son Polyphemus. I know the gods wanted him home, I know that, but do not forget my anger. Do not forget justice and revenge that I must have. So I say, Zeus, my brother, let me have my revenge upon the Phaeacians. They have brought one traveler too many home to his homeland. So I must destroy them. I must have my revenge against them. Allow me to do this, my brother." And Zeus looked at Poseidon with his blue, sea-blue eyes. With the salt and the lightning in his voice, he looked at him and he said, "You may do as you wish, my brother." "I can," said Poseidon, "and I will." And in that exact moment, as those words shimmered through the world, like the ripples from a cast stone, changing everything in the world, every blade of grass, every knot tied in a rope somewhere, every ladybug, every hummingbird feels the decisions of the gods, and the world is changed. So, on the island of Phaeacia, there was Alcinous the king, and his queen Arete. They were in a high room in their palace, a circular room with 12 beautiful windows looking out in all directions. They were drinking from golden cups, and they were watching as even then the boat which had carried Odysseus home to Ithaca returned to Phaeacia. And it was coming across the water. They could see the wet oars glimmering in the sun. The sailors working there, the mast and the sail filled with air and wind. A proud sight, for they were proud of their boats, a seafaring people and proud of it, and glad in their hearts to see such a sight. But in that moment, though the sky was cloudless, suddenly there was a clap of thunder, and bang! That boat was turned entirely to stone. And it did not sink. It froze there. It stuck. It had become an island. Every eyelash, every hair on the arm of the sailors there, every rope on the deck was completely stone, granite, locked there in its place in the sea. And people on shore, fishermen and people walking back and forth, they looked and they gasped in surprise. And King Alcinous and Arete looked, and they gasped as well. They almost dropped their golden cups. And then a moment later there was a second surprise, for suddenly, bang, there was a huge ring of mountains floating in the air above their island. Just hanging there, huge mountainous things there up in the air, and the shadows covered the island. The island was covered in darkness. And the roosters began to crow, and dogs began to bark. People lit candles, and they stepped out of their houses, looking up with fear into the sky. And a moment later, all of those mountains crashed down in a great ring around that island. Boom! Just like that. And the waves went up around on all sides and spread out into the world. And dust flew up and then drifted away. And King Alcinous and Queen Arete looked out their windows, and they could no longer see the sea. All they could see was stone. And Queen Arete spoke and said, "So it is true, my husband. The prophecy delivered to us by Hermes years ago. Do you remember? He came, and he said that one day we would welcome a traveler who, unbeknownst to us, was hateful to the gods. And we would shelter this man and carry him to his homeland, but we would be punished by Poseidon, and we would be forever locked away from the sea. So this has happened. That song Hermes sung to us of the future, it has come to pass, and now this very song is ringing in our ears." "Yes, my queen," said Alcinous, "it has come true." And the two of them held each other, and they wept. And it is said that that kingdom still lives on, surrounded as it is by high rock walls, walls that cannot be climbed by humans. Locked away from the earth, it is said that they still live on, living perpetually, for they are a magical race of people, clearly. And that travelers can come to the shore there and walk around. And the island out there, well, it's worn down by wind and by rain, but it's possible you might look and say, that looks something like a boat. And it is also said that perhaps they do not live on, not in that way at all, and that perhaps after all these years have passed, centuries of wind and rain have worn that island down to just a heap of rubble and stone. But still, travelers go there and walk across the stones. And if you were there, if you wait a little while till everyone but you is gone, perhaps you will notice a stillness in the shadows and a silent but beautiful dancing music coming out of the air. And you will listen for that, and then you will realize it comes not from the air, but from the stones and the ground. And if you were there, you might bend down and pick up a stone, a small, hard, beautiful stone, and hold it to your ear, and you will hear a murmuring and a singing that seems to come from that rock. For it is said that the Phaeacians live on magically, but they have simply gone inside the stones to sing and to dream. So in this way the Phaeacians were punished. And back at the hut of Eumaeus, Odysseus and Eumaeus traded stories for a good long while. And then late in the day, when the sun was nearing the horizon, when Helios in his crackling chariot was getting near to the edge of the sky, Eumaeus spoke and said, "These pigs, they're getting devoured by the suitors. Those bad men in that palace, every day they demand that I send another pig up there for them to devour. But I tell you, I'm devouring a few of these pigs myself. No disrespect to my master, but I want these pigs to go somewhere else and beside the bellies of those thieves. So what do you say? Let's the two of us have a little feast of our own." And with that, Eumaeus walked outside, and he selected a pig there. In the fading pink light of the sun, he chose a certain pig, and he took it next to a fire there, and he pulled out some bristles from the back of the pig, some hairs from the skin of the pig, and he threw them into the fire, and said some words praising the deathless gods. And then he took a knife, and he slit the throat of that pig, killed it, and butchered it right there. And he took bits of the meat from all of the legs of the pig, and the back, and the snout as well, and very carefully, feeling the whisper of the wind around him, feeling the moment he was in, like a statue you hold in your hands and then open your hand and give away. Feeling that moment, he took that meat and he put it in the fire. And it went down into the fire, and it burned, and the smell of it went up on the smoke, riding on the horse of the smoke up into the sky. High up it went, and the gods smelled that delightful flavor, and they were glad in their hearts. And Eumaeus said words to Zeus, praising Zeus, and Apollo, and Athena, and Poseidon as well, and finally Hermes, the god of all swineherds, who looks after swineherds. Hermes, the giant killer, slayer of Argos. And then he took that meat inside when it was all cooked, and he sat down, and there were plates before them, and Odysseus and Eumaeus ate. And they drank the wine that was there, and they enjoyed the good things that were close at hand. And as they did so, clouds began to roll in, covering the sky, and there was a rumble far off, and a crack, a flash of lightning, and then a slow, cold rain began to drizzle down out of the sky, and to patter onto the roof of that stone hut. And all the air inside that hut changed, and the mood changed, and the candle flickered on the table. And Odysseus took another drink of wine, and then suddenly joy flared up inside his heart, and he said, "Aha! I think I'll tell you a story. Eumaeus, would you like to hear a story?" I can hear a story, sure. I might even give you a cloak for it." "Aha! Perhaps you will. Perhaps you will. Well, this is a story about the Trojan War. For as I said, I served with Odysseus himself. And I remember a night much like this one, with a cold, drizzling rain falling. And I was part of an ambush along the north wall of the Trojan city. We had all gone there, Odysseus as well. He was leading us, and we were camped out there in the night, and the rain was falling, but I, like a fool, I'd left my cloak back in the boat. And I thought I could make do. I thought I would be all right. But by the time the third watch of the night came around, I was very cold. I was shivering. I could see frost on our shields. In fact, it was a cold night. And so I went to Odysseus, and I nudged him in the side, and I said, "Captain, Odysseus, I don't think I can make it. It's cold here, and like a fool, I left my cloak back in the boat. I'm not going to make it through the night." "Say no more," said Odysseus. And he raised himself up, he sat up, and around us were all the other soldiers wrapped in their cloaks. And he said, "Gentlemen, soldiers, I've realized we are camped a little further north than I had planned on. So someone must run back to Agamemnon in the boats and tell him our position, so that the ambush will go off well tomorrow. Can someone do that?" And just then Thoas, son of Andrymon, stood up and said, "I will go. I am the fastest runner here. I will go." And he took off his cloak, and he threw it to the ground, and he ran off into the darkness, and we heard his steps vanishing away in the silence. And Odysseus looked at me and said, "There's your cloak." And I picked up that woolen cloak and wrapped it around myself, and I was warm. And so that night the cleverness of Odysseus kept me warm the whole night through. Good story," Eumaeus said, "good story. And I see your point. I see what you're saying. I get the meaning of this story. Have no fear, it is a cold night, is it not?" And he went to a chest at the side of the room there, and he opened it up, and he took a cloak out of that chest, a beautiful woolen cloak. And he tossed it across the room to Odysseus, who caught it. "There you go, sir. This'll keep you warm all night long." And then Eumaeus took a sheepskin from that trunk and wrapped it around his shoulders. And he strapped a sword to his belt, and he picked up a bronze spear, and he said, "As for me, I will go to sleep outside with the pigs, for that is how I keep them safe from the wolves and the thieves. There's a stone out there. I'll sleep under that stone. I'll be just fine. You, traveler, take care in this house. Enjoy yourself a good sleep. You've come a long way. Good night to you." And Eumaeus turned and went out into the rain and the cold of the night air. And he went and lay down next to that stone, and he fell asleep. And Odysseus, inside that hut, felt gladness in his heart, knowing that his dear swineherd Eumaeus was caring for his pigs and his swine in such a loyal and beautiful way. And then he went to the table, and with his 2 fingers he snuffed out the candle on the table, so that the smoke went whispering up into the night air. And he wrapped that cloak around him, and as thunder rumbled far off, he lay down on a wooden bench there in the hut. And as rain began to drizzle onto the roof, Odysseus closed his eyes. And then, despite all his troubles, he began drifting off, and then Odysseus fell asleep. All right. Thank you for joining me here for this story. Thank you for dwelling in this story with me. Odysseus returning home to Ithaca. Is this not a box of mirrors? Is this not a complicated labyrinth of selves we're in? We're in a part of this story. Odysseus doesn't have to kill anything. I like this part of the story a lot, actually. It seems quiet, but it's strangely beautiful. It begins with him asleep. Sleep, which moves this part of the story forward, moves the Odyssey forward so often. Odysseus, who in the Iliad was a warrior and a thinker and a fighter, and he is that as well in the Odyssey, but he also must learn by failure and through sleep and dreams, things like that. So he falls asleep strangely. He misses that homecoming. And immediately he's suspicious. So we see in this section of the Odyssey his cleverness almost to a fault, right? It's almost like some kind of mental illness, almost, I would say, right? He's home, and can he be real? Will you just be real, Mr. Odysseus? Can you just say, oh, thank God I'm freaking home. It's Ithaca, finally. No, he can't do that. He restrains his emotions. He keeps it inside, and he makes up a story for the boy, the fisher boy, who asks him, who tells him where he is, and then he tells his story about I'm from Crete. He says over and over again that I'm from Crete in this part of the story. Apparently the folks from Crete were known as liars at the time, tellers of tall tales. So Odysseus tells numerous tall tales in this part of the story. And it's kind of a delirious ride. I like it, I have to say. And who is he really? And who are any of us when our circumstances are taken from us, when the situation we're used to being in, our homes, our family, our jobs, all those things. For Odysseus, it was having a boat, having a sword, being a warrior, a soldier, and now he has lost all these things, and he must somehow reclaim them. And so one way in which he begins to reclaim a sense of who he is through stories. Stories that define him in his own way. He tells the story, so he defines himself for others. So this whole part of the Odyssey is in many ways a praise song to storytelling and the power of story to change who we are, to change how others see us. Politicians know this well, do they not? The politician who tells the story which the most amount of people are going to believe, that's the one who gets elected. That's the one who tells the most compelling story, the story people want to believe. Whether it is that we are Germany and we need more elbow room, whether it is we are America and we're a great nation, whether it is you are oppressed by an evil force, which is the government, whatever that story is, a politician must tell a compelling story. And people respond to that and they change how they act, how they think and what they do, and how they think of themselves. So Odysseus does that. He changes his story and he tells these stories. I'm from Crete. My father was a priest of Poseidon. I'm from Crete and I'm a carpenter. I love the trees. I hate the sea. He gets to live these other lives, and of course it alters the behavior of those around him. And what he wants most to do here is to fit in and to be believed. So he gets to Eumaeus there, and he tells a story which explains how he knows Odysseus and why he thinks Odysseus is going to come home soon, while also kind of providing evidence for his life as a wandering man, as a beggar who's had hard times and has come across the sea. And Eumaeus hears this and is suspicious in some ways, right? He talks about beggars who come and tell stories just to get a cloak from Penelope. But nevertheless, Eumaeus believes him. And then we get the whole crazy cloak thing, which is great, you know. Eumaeus sets it up saying people come and they get their cloaks and they tell lies and Penelope believes them, which is very sweet, actually, right? Often we believe stories that we know to be false because we find them to be beautiful. And so that is perhaps what is happening with Penelope. She knows those stories to be false, but she wants to believe them, and so she listens, and she treats the beggars well, and she gives them gifts and perhaps a cloak. Beautiful moment, actually. And then Odysseus, right? So he talks about this to Eumaeus, and Eumaeus is like, "Oh, you're just another beggar wanting a cloak." And also, slightly before this, Odysseus says, "If he does come back, dress me in beautiful clothes and help me to live as a king." And of course, he's speaking about the day when he will come back himself, not just when some other guy, Odysseus, will come back and as a reward, this beggar will get a cloak. But no, he's talking about his own clothes. There will be a day when I will be king. He's asserting that in a safe way because it's inside this narrative for Eumaeus. It's a little dizzying, all of these changes and these points of view in this part of the story. And then Odysseus tells the story of how he came wandering across the sea and saw Odysseus there, and so knows he will come back. And we get this great story of the cloak where he's cold. So Odysseus, in disguise, tells a story about himself helping someone get a cloak. And because he tells that story about Odysseus getting a cloak through his cleverness, Odysseus, through his cleverness, gets a cloak. It is a maze, and I enjoy being the mouse in that maze looking for the cheese. It's fun. It's a fun and clever part of the Odyssey. Can I say fun? Well, I guess I'm going to say fun. It's one of the things I feel. It's less grief-stricken, perhaps, than some parts of the story, but it follows from Odysseus' character in a very beautiful and true way. He is a man of cleverness. He is able to change who he is, who he seems to be, and he is able to tell stories. And his stories mostly convince those around him, though Athena, as I said, is not convinced, of course. So it's, in the long range, in the big picture, it is something a little bit sad about him, right? How would it feel to be in relationship with this man? This man who is always on his guard, always suspicious, always ready with a story, and always ready to see how he appears to others, always aware of that. Are you going to get a real feeling out of him? What does it take to do that? He is a man of deep feeling, but he keeps it inside often. Though he does weep a fair amount, and he does finally weep when Athena drives the fog away and shows him that he actually is home, and he remembers his childhood, making hats out of seaweed on the beach with his father Laertes. So this part of the Odyssey makes me think about how stories create our world and create who we are. And I think of politicians. I think of racial profiling, right? A policeman, in a very honest way, just as all of us do, wishes to make sense of a situation and so makes a story out of it, or chooses a story which he already knows and applies it to the situation. All of us do that all the time. The trouble is, most of our policemen need to know some new stories, some other stories, besides the one which they usually tell, which is that the man with the brown skin is a criminal and is a danger to me, which is a story. And sometimes it's even true, but of course, it is far from the only story. And I say that because I was taught that story as well. Growing up as a white person, as a person descended from Europeans and European Americans, I saw more blacks on the TV and in my record collection than I did in my life. And so those were the stories I absorbed about them. They were either criminals on shows like Miami Vice, which I would watch, often Hispanic, not African-American, but African-American as well, or they were geniuses like Jimi Hendrix, who kind of blew my mind. And so those are the two stories I was given by my culture to deal with people of color. So I say this about racial profiling and about the police because honestly, those are the stories. The stories the police are given are the stories I was given as well. And I think if most of us look honestly at the stories we were taught about race, we have those same stories. And so they come up and they shape our world and shape how we deal with others. And I can only hope that I am aware enough to be aware of that story and to dismiss it when it is not the truth, which is pretty much all the time. So I don't see a person of color and then apply that story, which I was taught, which is the TV show where the bad guys have the guns and they've got brown skin. So we need new stories, and so it is. Anyway, this is a large hallway to go down to, but it's what I come to from thinking about identity and the self and the stories we tell and the stories others tell about us. So clearly, those policemen, and if we are honest, all of us, need some news stories about race. And I think also of somebody like Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan, the folk singer, artist, rock musician person, the genius, who I admire very much, who went through many changes in his career, his musical career, right? He was a folk musician, then he was a rock musician, then he had a gospel album, he had a country album, a man constantly changing, and those changes in some ways were heartfelt. They're things he really wanted to do. But at the same time, they kept him alive in a marketplace which wants to package singers and musicians as one thing quite often. Neil Young, if I can delve into the footnotes here, Neil Young, same problem in some ways. He wanted to change. The record company would not let him change, didn't want to see him change, sued him for making albums that were deliberately bad, basically, because they thought that's what he was doing. Now, maybe he was just lost, who knows. But with Mr. Bob Dylan, he wanted to change, it seems. And he also told many stories about himself early on, especially in interviews. It was hard to get a straight story from him. People would ask where he was from, and he would say, oh, I wandered around a lot. He would make something up often. I come from Hibbing, Minnesota. I'm a Jewish boy who listened to a lot of records. That would be one story. But he would give other stories, too, about how I left early in my home. My parents are dead. I traveled on the rails. I did this. I worked in a farm for a while in California. All these stories, which he would say early on to journalists and people like that who wanted to nail him down, wanted to affix him with their formulated phrase, as T.S. Eliot says in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. As though the nerves were fixed in patterns on a screen. And when I am fixed and formulated, when I'm wriggling under a pin, that's something like that, he says. So Bob Dylan, to escape being frozen in one version of his story, chosen by the powers that be, the editors, the journalists, would make up these stories. And they're not quite as crazy, perhaps, as some of Odysseus' stories, but then again, maybe they are. So I mention this not because I admire Bob Dylan, but just to make the point that these things we're seeing in a story like this, they exist in the world. They are patterns in us and around us, and not just something in a story like this. I have a box of old ID cards of mine, driver's licenses, a ID card to get into Martha Stewart Omnimedia, where I was a temp for 6 months, for example. Things like that. I should probably throw these things away. But they are, each one of them is an old story about myself, perhaps. And I kind of like having them in a box. The old stories we tell about ourselves. Thank you for listening to this podcast and for exploring this story with me. May we be aware of the stories we tell about ourselves. May we be able to tell stories about ourselves that we value and that feed us and nourish us in our hearts. Thank you for listening to this podcast. And if you're able to support the podcast, please do so. Patreon's a great way to do that. There's information about that and more stories on my website, which is jayleeming.com, JAYLEEMING.com. I should mention I was a potato farmer in Wales when I grew up. I was a very small child. And my parents, well, they were poor there, and my dad was an encyclopedia salesman. So at night I used to flip through the encyclopedias and look at all the things there. At first I hardly knew what I was reading, but as I got older I would flip through it. Now they were old, of course, but I would read things about the G. I remember the G volume was very good. I would read about gourds and George Washington and all kinds of things like that, gorges and stuff like that. But eventually I knew Wales was not the place for me, so I shipped out. I got a job on a boat, peeling potatoes as it was. Horrible things. I was down the bottom of the boat all the time. The bilge was sloshing around, and I sailed across the sea. I said goodbye to my parents. They were kind of freaked out, actually, but they knew I had to see the world. So I sailed for America. And I came to America, and we got off on the pier there. I remember. I mean, oh boy, it was rough. I was there on, Ellis Island. I had to say I was an immigrant all the way from Wales. They asked why I'd come. I didn't have a reason. I said because I had dreams that I was a rock star, that I was somebody named David Bowie or perhaps Michael Jackson. They didn't know what I was saying, but they wrote that down, and they said, all right, kid, go into America and do what you're going to do. So I walked immediately from there to Texas, and I got myself a shovel. I started to dig. I knew digging was the way. Dig down. I dug down and dig down. I found stuff down there. A turquoise, statue of a little cat that showed up in the story of the Odyssey. I found some other things, some bones, and finally, of course, I struck oil, covered my face. I was covered in it, and I became a millionaire, and now I live in my spaceship that floats above the sea, where I record these podcasts for you. May the north wind bless your shoulder. May the south wind bless the corner of your left eyelash. May the east wind tell you that zippers are kind of dubious. And may the west wind sing you a song that you hear in your sleep when your ears are completely closed. Thank you for listening to this dream, and take care.